Tonight I was planning to focus a little bit on ear birding, birding by ear. And one of the things that when we did this Atlas feedback survey after the first year of the Atlas, one of the really interesting and actually very common comments that I got from a lot of Atlasers was that they were surprised how much they learned, how much they were add to their ear birding skills. So it is really important for atlasing. It's not everything. Atlasing requires us to actually slow down and observe the birds a lot longer, but figuring out where those birds are and which birds to follow is really, really helpful if you actually know your birds by sound. And then on top of that, you can use some of your sound ID skills to actually identify fledglings. So you may not be able to see the birds up in a nest somewhere above you, but you can use the sounds that they're making to identify them to species and know that there actually are those birds in that nest. Rose-breasted grosbeaks are one that I don't know, I think that it's a very cute little begging sound. You go, it's me here. And it's like funny little sound that they make. And it's very unique, and just the rose-breasted grosbeaks give that sound. So if you hear that, you know that you have a rose-breasted grosbeak fledgling somewhere near you. So it does come into play with atlasing, maybe not as much as if you were doing like a point count survey or some like a breeding bird survey or something, but it's still quite helpful. So I wanted to start out with a little bit talking about the difference between songs and calls. I get a lot of questions about the difference there between a song and a call. And the reason why that's important for the Atlas is because we have this, one of the breeding codes is singing bird. And we actually have three breeding codes that relate to singing birds. And when we use that term singing birds, we really want birds that are giving a song and not a call. So we'll go over a little bit what the difference is. So songs tend to be those longer, more complicated sounds that birds are making. They use them to attract mates and also to advertise their territories. So they're using them to communicate with potential, often females, and also to communicate with other competing individuals so that they're not invading on their territory. So these sounds tend to be given only during the breeding season. And usually a lot of the birds that are giving songs are giving them most frequently early in the morning and late in the evening. One thing to be aware of if you're just getting into learning songs, it can be a little confusing because a lot of birds have multiple songs that they give. They may give, one song that's like their primary song, but then sometimes you might hear them do something completely different, and that's probably their alternate song. So there are a few species, quite a number of species actually, that have these alternate songs or different song types. So here I have just a short example. Most of us know the northern parula as being the one that's like, it's like a zipper that's being zipped up. It's like zip. But they also give one where it's almost like they have a stutter, but it's still that same buzzy zip sound. It's kind of like stuttering along. So those are both parula songs. So this is in contrast to a call, which tend to be very short and simple sounds. Usually oftentimes just one note, but sometimes multiple notes. And that is used primarily for communicating either within a family unit or within a flock of birds. So that's what you'll use, that's what you'll hear if you're listening for, like right now, a lot of the blue jays are giving a lot of funny little noises, and that's them talking to each other, the pair, the male and the female, talking to each other and being like, feed me a little treat, please. And so that's kind of their contact calls. You'll get a lot of begging sounds, which is the juveniles give, and also a lot of times the females will give that when they're either soliciting food during courtship, or they're actually soliciting population. They'll also be used for alarms, giving alarm sounds. Sometimes they'll use it to like wake the young up, so to like give them food. And those are the sounds that you're hearing at flight too, those nocturnal flight calls. Those are all calls. So these are sounds that can be given throughout the whole year, and any time of day. So the simplest advice that I have for learning those differences is to use the Merlin app. So if you haven't downloaded the Merlin app or checked that out yet, I tend to refer people to that. I haven't really found any errors yet in terms of what it calls a song versus a call. So for each species, you just go to that sound tab, as you see here in this image, and then it will identify for you which sounds are the songs and which are the calls. Anything that's labeled as a song can be recorded as a singing bird. Anything that's a call note would actually just be, if you're not seeing any other behaviors, that would be marked down as a bird in the breeding habitat. So that H code. Birds also make some sounds without using their syrinx. And they make those sounds using different parts of their body. Some of them, they use their feathers to make noises. So they're like hitting their wings together. Rock pigeons will do that. They'll like clap their wings together above their head. Other times it's from birds flying really quickly through the air, and you'll hear those feathers being whooshed through the air. Then they use their beak a lot. It's a nice hard surface. They can drum on things, make lots of noise, or they can snap their bill together. Owls do that a lot when they're courting each other as well. And then there are some birds that are making internal sounds. If you are familiar with sage grouse out west, or you know how frogs will inflate their air sacs and then decompress them to make sounds. So there's a few birds that do that, including American bittern. And these sounds are mostly, not entirely, but mostly used for attracting mates. Sometimes they're used to express alarm. And then they're typically given during the breeding season. Some of them, again, can be at other times, but a lot of them are given during the breeding season. So those are the three main types of sounds that you'll be paying attention to. So you've got those complex songs, the short calls, and then some of these non-vocal sounds. So what is it exactly that you're listening for? So when you go outside, what are some of the features of these sounds that you want to be paying attention to? So you can think of these as just different aspects of the sound. So you have the rhythm. So whether it's fast or slow, or speeding up or slowing down, whether it's high pitched or low pitched, whether it's changing in pitch. Sometimes birds will repeat the same sounds over and over again. Sometimes they'll mix it up and they'll have, make one sound and then they'll make a different sound and another sound. And that would be something like the mockingbird, which is, imitating all kinds of different birds, and it just strings those sounds together. And it's like this super long song that seems to never stop, right? As opposed to some of our flycatchers, which just make this really quick little sounds. Chebec, for example. And then volume is another one. Some birds have really, really loud calls. You can think of like that ovenbird going teacher, 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 or nuthatches, which can be a little bit quieter. And they're just doing their little yank, 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 yank. And then we also have the tonal quality, which I have another slide for. Before I move to that slide, I did want to say that so sometimes you can get tricked by birds. So these are kind of your 6 main categories of things that you'll be listening for. But you can get tricked because there are mimics, right? So we have like catbirds, thrashers, mockingbirds, starlings, there's gnatcatchers, there's a few species that are mimicking other things. There's also birds that have different dialects. So if you're often birding around the capital region and then you suddenly go out to Western New York, you might not recognize some of the sounds, or you might think, that sounds like a hooded warbler, but it has a weird accent, right? So that happens a lot, even just within New York State, let alone if you travel across the country. And then the last thing to pay attention to is sometimes there's duets. And so there's multiple birds will be singing at the same time. They might be completing different parts of the song and jumping in, and there can be all kinds of different things going on. So those are just a few things to be aware of. But let me talk a little bit more about this tonal quality. And that's really what you're thinking of if you're thinking like, oh, that's a buzzy sound. Oh, that's nasally. Oh, that's really like a really pretty whistle, or like a flute-like song. That's what we're talking about with those tonal qualities. And that can be really useful to really get to know a species and what its calls are and songs are, because even if a cardinal sounds different when you go out to Western New York, the sound of its voice will still be very similar. So you may not recognize that exact pattern that you're hearing, but you'll recognize that voice. That's how I tend to think of these tonal qualities, is like, what is their voice? What does it sound like? Another trick here is that some birds can make multiple noises at once at the same time. So they have like their syrinx is split, and they can pass air through both sides of it at the same time, producing 2 completely different sounds. So if you think of like a blue jay or a wood thrush, those are some birds that are making these really complex sounds that sounds like there's 2 birds and there's only one. So that's a really cool thing that they can do that we can't do. So some of the questions that you might want to ask yourself when you actually are out in the field and kind of trying to figure out what something is basically asking yourself questions about these features that I just mentioned. So how fast is it going? What's the rhythm? Was it melodic or rough? That's the tonal quality. How loud was it? High pitched or low pitched? Was there a pattern? If there was a pattern, how was that pattern put together? Were there repetitions? Were they different sounds? Was it long? Was it short? That kind of information. A really cool thing that's been happening, these basically evolution before our eyes, that maybe some of you have I've read about is these white-throated sparrows. We tend to think of them as singing, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." And that's how we kind of remember that that's what that species is, that's singing. But over the past decade or so, they've started to adapt and have these different dialects, we call it, where it's starting out in the western part of Canada. They started to sing, they dropped part of their sound. So they would sing, "Oh, sweet Canna, Canna, Canna," instead of "Canada, Canada, Canada." They would just drop that duh sound at the end. And that's been slowly spreading to the east. So that's basically hitting, I want to say, Ontario roughly now. So maybe in a few years, we'll start hearing some of these variations here as well. But for now, I think most of them are still doing the full phrase, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." Okay, so tricks. We always like tricks. Mnemonics are one of the best tricks that we have available as birders. There are some very standard mnemonics that have been established for a long time that a lot of birders use, and you've probably heard a lot of these. So like yellow warbler is "sweet, sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet." Whereas a chestnut-sided warbler is "please, please, please to meet you." I will say that these mnemonics don't always work for everyone. You may find that you don't hear what they're saying, and you'll just have to adjust the mnemonic to fit what you're actually hearing. Another trick is if you're really good with sounds, if you can whistle or imitate things, that's a really good way to kind of solidify those sounds in your head. So if you can whistle and imitate exactly what you're hearing, you'll learn it quicker. Another trick is we have these handy little devices that we carry around with us everywhere. So take your phone and make a recording, and then you can listen to it again when you get back home. And so that way you can have that repetitive learning aspect. Some other tricks are to start with birds that are really common. So you might want to start with American robins, which are everywhere. And then you just focus in on that one sound. And as you start to learn, you're going to try to compare all the other sounds that you start learning to that. And then eventually you'll build this sound library in your head. And you'll be able to say, "Oh, that sounds a little bit like a robin, but it's really sweet. It's very smooth sounding and melodic. It must be a rose-breasted grosbeak. Or it sounds like a robin, but it's really rough and kind of hoarse and buzzy sounding. That must be a scarlet tanager." So you can start to slowly build this sound library in your head, just as you do probably images of birds. You can start to build these sound libraries. So for those of us, such as myself, that are much more visual learners, one of the things that has become really common these days is to use sonograms to help us learn. I feel like these were not really available when I started learning birds by ear. I really had to just like bug people to tell me what things were over and over and over again, or just like listen repeatedly. But nowadays we have a lot more resources, and we can use these sonograms to also help us visually learn at the same time that we're getting that auditory learning. So I wanted to just really briefly go over how to read one of these sonograms. So on the x-axis on the bottom, you have time. So that's an easy one. On the left, on the y-axis, you've got the frequency or the pitch, as we call it. So the really high frequency sounds are going to be higher up on this chart. And the lower sounds, like our voice, human voices, would be down in that like 3 range, right? 3-4 range. All right, so another thing to look at here is how dark these lines are. So the darker lines are louder than the thinner lines. And what you are looking for is what that pattern is, and you're gonna match that pattern. So if it goes from, from lower left to upper right, then you know that sound is rising in pitch. If it goes from a pale color to a darker color, it's going to get louder as it goes. So those are some ways to interpret this. And then the other thing to notice, you might see that you've got all these lines are kind of mirrored at different pitches. And those are the harmonics. And so the birds are making multiple sounds at different pitches. And that helps the sound be more robust, like a fuller sound. And as we use that term for human voices, if you're singing in harmony, then it sounds much more pleasing to our ears. So when you have these harmonics, it tends to sound nicer to us. So I have a couple of links. I want to put this link in. Whoops. Let me just jump out for 1 second. And I have a link that I want to put in the chat. Oh, can I not get to the chat while I'm sharing? No, should be able to.
I can share it if you need me to.
There we go. Yep. I think I just got it. Okay. Thanks, Matt. All right. So that website that I just put up is the accompaniment to the book, The Peterson's Field Guide to Sounds. Yeah, Matt's got his too. So this book is one of the books that I'll recommend later on, that has lots of detailed information with all the sonograms for all the species, including all the alternate songs, all of the call notes, things like that. And it helps you put words to labels to all of these things. So it's a very helpful. And then you can listen to the sounds at this link while you're looking at the book. So it's a really great resource. The sounds are available for free to anyone, even if you don't own the book. So that's why I've included it, because you can also get those nice sonograms when you look at things. So I wanted to take that same example we had before with the rose-breasted grosbeak and robin and tanager. These are 3 sounds that can be a struggle to learn when you're just getting started. When you're first starting to listen to birds, they kind of sound the same. But as you become more and more familiar and you practice more and more, you'll start to hear some of these differences that will help you differentiate the species. So you can kind of see in these sonograms. So we know that the grosbeak has a sweeter sound than the robin, and this tanager has kind of the harshest sound, right? So you can actually see that in these sonograms, where if you look at the rose-breasted grosbeak, almost all of these sounds have these nice harmonics, right? robins have a little bit less, and tanagers have almost no harmony. And you can actually see this middle note that down slurs. You can see that there's like all kinds of lines that are really parallel to each other, really close to each other. And that's going to be more of like this harsh kind of buzzy zzz sound. So we can actually use these sonograms to help you visualize those differences in the sounds, and that for some people can be very helpful. All right, so I wanted to talk about a little bit different approaches to learning. Everyone learns a little bit differently. If you want to practice, so practice is really what this is all about. It really just takes time, and it can be very frustrating in the beginning. It can take you years before you really start to feel like you have a good handle on these things, on identifying species. And you really never stop learning because there's just so much variation, and we still don't know a lot of things about sound. We don't know a lot of times whether females have a song. We don't know. We don't have documented what all of the juvenile sounds are like. So there's still a lot of information that we don't know. So even if you're an expert birder already and you already know your sounds, there's still lots that you're going to be learning as you're Alicing. So if you're wanting to practice learning by sound, I have a few suggestions. So when you're in the field, one approach is, if you hear something you don't know, you track it down and you try to see the bird singing. And for some people, that's really helpful, like myself, because then I can map that bird singing to the sound. And I can create that link a lot better. Another thing is to go out with more experienced birders and just keep asking them and over and over and over again until you get it. And then the other thing you can do nowadays, which is great, is you can use an app that will identify the sounds for you. So there's a number of different apps that do that. I tend to use Merlin because it's really easy to take a recording using Merlin and then upload it onto your eBird checklist. So you have that documentation right there in your eBird checklist. So I recommend using that one, but I know other people use some of these other ones like BirdNet or Song Sleuth. Another way to study these sounds is at home. You can do these repetitive, this like listening to the sound over and over and over again until it kind of solidifies in your mind. There are apps that can help you with that. So Larkwire is one I know a lot of people use, and it's kind of like a little game, and it matches things up so you're listening to similar sounding birds at the same time, so you can compare and contrast them. I learned way back in the day by just listening to the Peterson's CDs over and over and over again, like birding by ear. So if you still have a CD player, I know not all of us do. I think a lot of libraries still have copies of those CDs, so you could always take a set out from the library. Then there's also a number of websites that allow you to study those sounds online, or at least like look things up and listen to different variations. So Dendroica is one, the Macaulay Library for sure, Xenocanto, and eBird even, you can do those, the eBird quizzes. There's photo quizzes and there's also sound quizzes. And then getting back to those of us who are visual learners and kind of looking at those sonograms. So we can study those sonograms at home. So that's using some of the books that have come out recently. So like that Peterson's Guide to Bird Sounds by Nate Pipolo, or there's also the Warbler Guide, which came out a little while ago, but also has really detailed, great information for learning how to listen to sounds and getting familiar with the warbler songs. And then you can also look at the sonograms as you're listening to sounds using like Macaulay Library again. And then you can actually study those sonograms in the field. So a lot of these apps like Merlin allows you to, while you're taking a recording and while it's identifying those sounds for you, you can actually see the sonogram in real time. So you can actually see what's going on and you'll be able to like notice, oh, here's this red-eyed vireo that's going constantly. But then on top of that, you might see, I don't know, a black-throated green warbler going off. So you can actually see those the birds on the sonogram. So that's another fun thing to do. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is for people that have hearing issues. I am one of those people. I have high-end hearing loss. I always have. So sometimes I don't really realize how much I'm missing. But I've tried hearing aids. They don't really work for me. They work for some people. They work great. But if that's not an option for you, as I suggest starting there with your audiologist and getting tested. If those don't work for you, you can try this new app that just came out called Hear Birds Again. And what that does is specifically drops those high-pitched sounds down to where you can hear them, to where your hearing is still good. You do have to relearn sounds over again because things are going to sound distorted. But I use this, I've been using it for years now. And I find it indispensable for me. And then also Merlin can be really helpful. I mean, I've definitely taken a sound recording using Merlin and then it pops up, oh, there's a brown creeper. I had no idea there was a brown creeper because I can't hear them. And so then once I realize there's probably a brown creeper around, then I start looking at all the tree trunks near me and then I find it. So that can be really helpful. And then lastly, I highly recommend going with someone who still has good hearing. And hopefully they can either help you identify or at least help you find the bird so that you can then identify it. So I personally use 3 of these techniques all the time. I often have my husband with me. I'm using that app that's dropping the pitch down and I'm referring to Merlin constantly. So don't be afraid to use the technology if you do have that kind of problem. So that's what I had to share. And I would love to get, if anyone has any comments about what I just presented, and I'm kind of looking at you, Matt. So Matt Medler is one of the regional coordinators for the Atlas, and he has worked for many years at the Macaulay Library. And so he's very familiar with studying bird sounds. I don't know if there's any additional tips that you might have or anything that maybe I said incorrectly that you want to correct.
No, that all sounded great. I dropped a couple of links in to the chat. One in particular, the introductory material that you were talking about, like in terms of like just visualizing sound with spectrograms, and then talking about pitch and buzzy or kind of whistled. Nathan Peplow, who wrote the Peterson guide, he has a website called Earbirding, and it looks like it hasn't been active in a long time, but he actually put the introductory chapters on the website. So a lot of the material you just covered is on his website. So it's a nice resource talking about things like upslurred and downslurred sounds and polyphonic and things like that. So that's a great resource for kind of learning the lingo and the general themes. And then the only thing I would say is if you don't have the Merlin app or don't have a smartphone, if you're on your computer, the eBird Explore species pages, those have the same exact sounds as the sounds that are in Merlin. So if you want to
Yeah.
listen to like the typical Scarlet Tanager songs and calls, you can go to the eBird species page for Scarlet Tanager, and it's the exact same photos and audio as what you would see in the Merlin pack.
And there's a lot of overlap as well with the All About Birds website too, correct?
Yep.
I think
Yeah.
there's like fewer sound recordings, but they have still a lot of overlap.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's actually the same sounds, but they don't, the All About Birds site doesn't have spectrograms, but I'm part of that team now, so I'll probably be introducing more sound related stuff and spectrograms into the All About Birds site.
Thanks, Matt. There's a lot of stuff going on in the chat. I'm gonna pop in a link. So somebody asked if there was a cheat sheet for the common mnemonics, and I did do a Google search today, and there's a lot of things that pop up. But one of the better ones I found is this one here that I just put in the chat. Has a lot of different species, and they all, for the most part, look like the ones that I've learned as well. So like they're the common mnemonics, they're not just totally made up. So I'm just gonna, let me go back to the beginning of the chat and see if I missed anything here. Okay, so someone asked about the mourning doves when they make that sound when they fly, when they take off from the ground. Yeah, that is their feathers, their tail feathers going through the air. That's what that sound is. And they can actually, interestingly enough, just a little side thing, they can choose whether or not to make that sound. So it's kind of a cool thing they can turn off or on. So a lot of times, like if you have bird feeders and you scare them, they'll make that noise as they fly off, right? So they're kind of like, they're like annoyed, and it's like their alarm call almost. So kind of cool. Okay, cool. Matt put the white-throated sparrow piece in there. Okay. Yeah, Rory gave a nice tip, and I do I second this idea that he says he knows somebody with who's an excellent earbirder who relies on creating specific descriptions of the bird sounds that he associates with those sounds. And I think that is probably the best way to go. If you have your own little tricks that sound, that you can helps you remember exactly what you're hearing rather than what other people say they're hearing. So like Jared and I were saying earlier, talking about American goldfinch, right?
Yep.
And Jared was like, I don't hear potato chip. I do hear potato chip when they call. So everyone is different, and it's just, you gotta make up something that works for you. What do you hear when you, Jared, instead of potato chip?
I don't think I've ever had a mnemonic that worked
No.
for them for me. No, it's
Okay.
just unique enough and you hear it enough, especially early on in birding. I mean, I just hear like, "Woo-choo-choo-choo," and it's like, yep, that's what it is.
There you go.
So it is maybe an onomatopoeia that's in my head when I hear it, and not exactly a mnemonic, I guess would be the way to put that.
Yeah. Somebody asked, said they had gotten hearing aids just 6 months ago. And they can hear the birds much better, but still have problems locating where the birds are coming from. I also have this problem. And I'm often like, oh no, it's over there. And my husband's like, no, it's behind you. And so I have this horrible problem with locating sounds. That yes, I think that is a common thing with hearing aids. Hearing aids can improve it. I know when I was testing hearing aids out for myself that it did help. But I know, Charlie, I know you use hearing aids. Do you find that it helps with your locating sound, or you still have
No.
problems? No.
I definitely have a problem locating the sound. I can hear them way better. And in fact, my audiologist designed a birding program for my hearing aids that de-emphasizes low sounds and emphasizes the higher pitched sounds. And that works really well. But I still have a lot of trouble locating the sound.
Yeah, I had the same, or my audiologist also programmed them that way, but it wasn't cutting it for me. But there were also some, so it depending on your hearing aid mode, there's some modes, right, where it's gonna focus the sound on what's in front of you, which is designed to help you when you're speaking to people, particularly in a crowded room. I know that the ones I had, there was a program that I could use that would not filter anything out. So it would be actually what I was hearing. And so it allowed me to locate things a little better. So yeah, so anyways, you can work with your audiologist to try to improve it, but it's probably still going to be a little bit of a problem.
Julie and Matt, I don't know if you know the answer to this one that came up, but can you slow down the Merlin recording in order to be able to listen to them more easily and remember them? Is a most recent question that came up.
Hmm.
I don't remember ever seeing it in there, but I don't use it a ton.
Matt, do you know?
I don't use it a ton either. I actually just used it for the first time this morning.
Oh my gosh, Matt.
Um,
Matt doesn't need to use Merlin.
I just tried playing a recording and I don't see any like playback option for half speed.
Yeah, I don't
think
know of any, none in the app. And I'm trying to think, I don't think there is even on the Macaulay website, I don't think you can either, right?
No.
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think maybe I mean there are sound editing programs like Adobe Audition. I know you can slow it down to half speed. But I'm not sure if that would be the best learning approach. It's kind of like what Julie was saying with the device that she uses. When you slow something down, it lowers the pitch. So it's basically like trying to learn a new song. Hearing something at half speed just isn't going to sound the same as what it would sound like in the field. So
Mhm.
there might be ways to hear a little bit more detail, but you'd kind of need to recalibrate when you hear the live bird.
Right. I think
Yeah.
I can see how it would help me at times to like, if I could slow it down, because sometimes I don't hear what's being described, like that something is maybe increasing in pitch, and I may not hear that, but if I slowed it down, I bet I could hear that. And then maybe if I sped it up, then I'd be able to like retain that sound memory. I don't know, but I agree that it's really difficult to relearn a lot of those sounds that when they're distorted. It definitely takes time, takes years again to relearn them, at least in my case. So
Julie, Bob Spawn, could I add a couple comments?
yeah, sure, Bob.
Okay. I actually taught birding by ear in, we had local birding schools here in Rochester for a number of years, and I taught that class, or attempted to. Basically, I would present an awful lot of the same kinds of things you're doing, but of course, you've added things that have come in since those years. But again, as far as I was concerned, chasing the bird down and putting some effort into actually doing it yourself, finding the bird and putting the song and the image together was the best way to learn them, and just doing that over and over until it stuck.
Mhm.
Most of the other things are helpful and they add to it, but for me, I didn't learn much separate from actually putting the finding it and the image and the sound together. And then after all these things, these classes, and I actually a couple times was asked to go to schools and put on things both at college level and high school. And again, where you come down, it really is personal. You end up with the mnemonics and that kind of stuff, trying to do something that makes sense to you. I mean, for me, some of the things make sense. Others, like Jared mentioned, I don't hear what the other person hears, but I can imitate a lot of stuff, and that's very helpful if you can do that. I think if somebody has a musical background, again, that's helpful because, again, that's built in. You recognize sounds better.
Mhm. Yeah.
That, you know, if you go out and do it a lot, I mean, a lot of people here are probably in the same position I've been in. If you go out doing surveys, breeding bird surveys, it's 90% or more sound. And so you must learn them or else you really can't effectively do a survey. And that's
Yeah.
just what it is.
And I think, I really think a key thing is to realize that it takes everyone a long time to learn these sounds. Like, it's not going to happen instantly or overnight unless you're like that, like 1% of people that actually can do that. But very few of us can do that. And we may seem like we're like amazing when we're out in the field with you, but we've put in the years, we've put in all all kinds of time and patience and studying and just
Yep,
repetitions.
each year a few more come back immediately, and you add a few more that stick for the next year, and over time build up the ones that you recognize.
Yeah. And I every year have to recalibrate again for when the migrants come back and be like, oh, I know that sound. What is that again? And then it's like it gets quicker every year, but every year like it takes a minute. I'm a little slow. but you get there. Um yeah, okay. Yeah, so somebody mentioned in the chat to listen, to kind of key in on alarm calls. And that's, so yeah, I guess I should mention, so the alarm calls, so there's certain sounds that some birds make when there are raptors nearby, predators of some sort. It could even be a cowbird, which is a nest predator, and you'll start hearing the vireos going nuts. So it's definitely good to key into those. The other end of the spectrum is if you're hearing mobbing calls. So if you're hearing lots of different species calling all at once, and you're hearing that chickadee dee 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 really loud, then and those vireos going crazy, then they're probably actually attacking something right there. So those are really good things to listen for when you're, and the other thing is, if it suddenly gets quiet, that is also a time to be looking up and looking around, because that means there's some sort of predator around. Could even be just a blue jay, but if everyone's getting quiet, then that's also a sign that something is up. So. Somebody said, I like that. And somebody sent a message, I guess it was a private message, but said that I think I mentioned that I'm a little slow in the spring to kind of retune my ears to the birds. And this person said, I think some of the migrating birds are a little slow too, as the early spring songs sound more like experiments than the final product. So there's definitely some of that. They're also getting their lungs back in shape each year when they arrive. It's just fun to listen to. I think we only have like 5 more minutes or so left. Oh, let me see, there's one more link I want to put in the chat. And then I want to make sure that if anyone has any questions on any topic related to the Atlas, please feel free to ask that too. It doesn't have to be about ear birding. But here's a YouTube tutorial that I thought was actually really good and goes over some of those different things that we talked about and what to pay attention to for sound. So it's kind of a cool little, it's like 8 minutes long. It's a short video, but I think very informative. So does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up?
I can toss out one more thought. If you want to
Okay,
try
Bob.
to try to learn and mimic some of the birds, that can be very useful in bird finding for atlasing. Let's say you go into a woods and there are no woodpeckers around. If you practice and you're even reasonable at barred owl, you can essentially stir up all the woodpeckers in the place. Some will come right to you, like you pull all the yellow-bellied sapsuckers in the world right to you. Flicker's probably next. Pileated will start calling, usually doesn't come in, but things like that can be useful. If you're up in the north part of the area, black-backed woodpecker responds very quickly and will come in from long distances to a barred owl call. You can use screech owls to stir up little birds, so you at least have some idea what's around. So you can use it both ways, both to learn to find things and to bring things to you.
Yeah. Good points. John, you have a question?
Not a question. I had the Peterson Field Guide Birding by ESCDs for Eastern and Central Birds for we had this a while back. I don't know if anyone else has had that one. And that one basically did a lot of it. The things in that one was just basically groupings of birds that sounded the same and try to just get the idea of what they were. And I listened to that enough. And now I use the Merlin app when I'm out. And a lot of times I'll just turn it on, listen to what's out there. If there's something I'm not sure what it is, at least the Merlin app gives me an idea of where to look and where to look. If it's a bird that's once I start realizing it's a bird that should be down low or a bird that's going to be up high, so it makes it a little bit easier to start spotting it. And if I have a visual of what I'm supposed to be looking for that's making that sound, it's a lot easier to find it than if I'm just looking for what bird is making that sound completely. But if I say it should be a black-throated green warbler, I'll be looking for that, and then I'll find it and then see it sing and say, okay, that's it. And then I'll start to remember the sounds that go with it.
Yes. Yep. I think it's really important to realize. I think some of us who have been birding for a long time forget that we're using a lot of different cues to help us figure out what something is. So we're also looking at the habitat that we're standing in. We're also listening to, is that sound coming from down low? Is it coming from up high? Is it coming from close to the trunk, out in the branches? Is it coming from a deciduous tree or coniferous tree? We're listening to, we're piecing together all kinds of different information. I think that's, something that maybe some of us don't always realize we're doing it. But that birding by ear that you showed, that's the one that I used when I first started birding as well. And I still have my little cheat sheet that I made from back then. And it's like, here's all the buzzy warblers all together. And here's the, you can start to lump things and really identify some of these groupings in your head so that you know next time, okay, that's a vireo pattern. I may not know that if it's a blue-headed or a red-eyed or a yellow-throated, but I know it's one of those. So it definitely helps you figure out where to look and what to be listening for and all those kinds of things.
I had a cassette, of bird calls that a coworker gave me because he had gotten a little bit, his hearing had gone, so he couldn't hear this thing. He goes, yeah, you take the, tape. I can't hear this anymore. So I had the tape for a while. Unfortunately, it was in my car when it got stolen. So whoever stole my car, when I recovered the car, that tape wasn't there anymore. So got that feeling it's like I knew, like, the people that stole the car, and they were probably sitting around getting stoned listening to bird calls. And as I said, that was a long time ago, though. That was probably about 20 years ago.
So I have one question on here from Rory. And oh yeah, Matt, that's a good point about learning what some of the mammals sound like and some of the frogs sound like and things like that. It's good to learn those so that you can rule them out and you actually know that you're paying attention to a bird instead of something else that you're never going to find. Rory, did you want to unmute yourself and ask more about, you asked what is atlasing?
Yeah, sure. I've heard the term atlasing a number of times, or I come across it on the internet, and I'm relatively new and I have no idea what it is. And I understand that regions are broken into blocks and the whole thing is a big mystery to me.
Okay. And where are you located roughly?
Brooklyn, New York.
In Brooklyn. Okay. Yeah, so and I think most people on here I recognize names, so I think a lot of people already know what atlasing is. But basically it's a inventory, it's a 5-year inventory of all the breeding birds in the state. And we ask people, volunteers, to go out and identify as many species as they can in those blocks that you said you're familiar with. You go out to those blocks and you identify all the species, and then you're also observing any breeding behaviors that they're showing. So maybe they're carrying nesting material, or actually you see them building a nest, things like that. So you'll document that information, and then we use all of that information, but it's collected statewide, to make these really detailed distribution maps for every species. So the 3 things that you have to keep in mind when you're atlasing is those blocks. We only want you to submit data from 1 block at a time. 2, you need to add those breeding codes. And then 3, you have to submit the data. We use eBird for data entry, and we have a particular portal, what eBird calls a portal. And so whether you're using the app or you're entering data online, you have to make sure you go to the actual Atlas portal to submit the data in order for it to show up on the map. So.
Okay, thank you. It sounds pretty advanced. I guess I probably wouldn't undertake to atlas right away.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that anyone can atlas. So even if you, most likely you know what a robin looks like. You're in Brooklyn, you know what a peregrine falcon looks like, probably, right? And peregrine falcons are eating all of those rock pigeons. So you can still, you don't need to know every species, as long as the species that you are documenting are accurately identified. That's what matters. So yeah, so don't be, it sounds daunting, and a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm not qualified, but really as long, you know, a kid could do this if they're looking at their birds and at their feeders in their backyard, as long as they know what the species are, then you're qualified to participate. So
Yeah, and one important thing about atlasing is that it's not about like finding the rare birds or the kind of flashy birds, like documenting an American robin like nesting, you know, by your residence, like that counts just as much as like a peregrine falcon nest. Like the goal is to try to document a representative sampling of the species found in a given area and confirming those. So so common species count just as much and sometimes more because they're easier to confirm. So
and a lot of people overlook them. So we have a lot of blocks that people have spent a lot of time atlasing in, and there's no house sparrow reported in that block. And it's like, I don't believe that. I'm sure there's house sparrows somewhere in that block. It's just people don't pay attention to them. But for the atlas, we really want to pay attention to everything. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, and Charlie mentioned that, yeah, I do have a few atlasing, intro to atlasing tutorials on the YouTube channel as well, on our Atlas YouTube channel. So we are a little past 8, so I don't want to keep people too long. As I mentioned before, we are doing these the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month. So I think we are due on the 24th, 25th, what is it? The 24th will be the next one. I forget what the topic is, but something timely. But as always, you can ask any questions that you have. So hopefully that was helpful, and happy atlasing. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.